Welcome back to Go-Tanium Tech Talks. Yeah, we're changing the title of the show slightly with this episode because what we're all about is Tanium Tech, right? And we want to make sure that you get the appropriate level of tech you need to be successful as a Tanium administrator. And today's show is all about in the weeds with RBAC. I don't know about you, but over the years in IT, when I think about RBAC, I just cringe. It's always ugly and complicated, and there's always some scenario that I just can't get to work right with the RBAC model. But what we're going to do today is we're going to show you, take you into the weeds, how Tanium RBAC works. And I have a special expert with us today. Peter, introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks, Ashley. My name is Peter Fleece. I've been with Tanium for 3.5 years, and I'm the console lead SME. And I get to talk about this fun topic of role-based access control all the time. I know it's not everyone's favorite, but getting it right is certainly important for any Tanium deployment.
You're right. Peter and I were just talking before the show, and I recalled this old phrase that proper planning prevents poor performance. Have you ever heard that? The 5 Ps, right? I think there's 5 of those. Yeah. So proper planning prevents poor performance. You want to have a properly designed RBAC implementation that will save you a lot of pain down the road. And it's going to enable that security and control that you need in this world-class endpoint management environment that can do just about anything. You want to make sure that the people have only the access they need, right? So Peter, tell us about, all up, if you had to explain RBAC, how would you define that for folks?
Well, the best way is probably to talk through a diagram that we have in our documentation where if you can see this diagram, there's several components or objects that we talk through in Tanium. And when you're getting started, there's a lot to think about. So I try to break it out into simpler pieces right away. And first and foremost is the user groups. This is like other enterprise software where, you define your user groups first and you start to think about that and what do they need to do within the product. Then you don't have to be thinking about roles or anything right away, but getting a list of that whenever we're talking through it with a customer, getting that list really helps because then we know who are the players, who are the groups that are going to be in the product. And second, we talk about computer groups because this is the most important aspect you can assign to someone because without it, with the wrong computer groups assigned, you don't have the right visibility, you don't have the right endpoint management rights. So those two things is where we start. So you usually get your LDAP sync set up, or you get to your LDAP directory server, whether it's Active Directory or something else. And then once you have those groups in Tanium, and then you assign computer groups. So if it's a desktop workstation admin type of group, they would only get computer groups related to Windows workstations or something. Or a Linux server admin, they might just get Linux groups. So then you don't even talk about roles until we get through user groups and computer groups, and then that helps us to understand who's going to be using what part of Tanium. There is another concept here in this diagram, the idea of personas. So what is directly assigned to a user is when the user logs in, they will have as their normal operating mode. But there's often times where there's different work scopes or different hats people have to wear. That's sometimes what we talk about, wearing different hats. That's when we have this idea of personas where users can slip into another profile. We use the term persona. I think other products may call it profiles, but you're changing your work scope and moving into those to do different tasks that require different rights.
So Peter, I think you hit on a couple things that are really important for our audience to understand there. You said, normally when we think about, okay, I need to give this person this thing in Tanium, but before we get there, we have to actually plan out where does that user come in from? Where does that group come in from? So when you look at this diagram, folks, pay attention to the users and the user groups. Those are coming in from Active Directory, typically some other LDAP source where you can pull in your users and groups. And then you're going to assign them to the personas, and then those personas are going to have the permissions that they need, which would be the computer groups or the modules, whatever they have permissions to. And by default, there's a persona out of the box that they just get. So you don't have to necessarily build out extra personas first thing unless you have some of those extra things. But here's what I want to help you understand, because this really helped me. I'm an old Microsoft guy. And back in the day, we used to say AGLP, accounts, go into global groups, go into local groups, and get assigned permissions. Folks, this is the same thing here. So you have a user that goes into a user group. Okay, that's the AG part. Then your local group kind of concept in Microsoft here would be your personas, bundles of permissions. And then in that bundle permissions there, you've got all those different module access type things you're usually wanting to grant for specific bundles of computers. And what that does is this industry standard abstraction layer, so that you've got an abstraction of the computers, or I should say the permissions. You've got an abstraction of the users, and then in the middle where those personas are assigned to the user groups, that gives you that many-to-many dynamic relationship and gives you that flexibility. So that AGLP thing from the old Microsoft NTFS permission days, it's kind of like what we're doing here, and that really helped me wrap my mind around it as something that I could bridge the concepts. So Peter, where do we go next here? What would you recommend that folks take a look at next?
Well, I'm going to jump into into our computer groups page, because one of the things that's difficult to understand right away is, how do you assign computer groups to users? Well, we ship a lot of these, what we call default computer groups, where we've already created the filters, where if you're looking for, just for example, if I'm looking at all CentOS 6, there's already a question or a filter you can use for that. So now, even though we have all of these groups, of course, for situations where you have different operating units or subnets or something where you'll need to create your own computer groups to assign to these user groups, there are cases where, these standard out of the box ones will work for many things, but there are times where you need to create custom ones for your organization, and getting that right from the start is very important. And sometimes you need to use solutions like custom tagging, or like I mentioned, the subnet sensor, some sort of mechanism to get this separation between endpoints, so that when users come in, they have the right management rights over those endpoints. One great thing with the personas is that if you have different needs over different endpoints, you can have one persona that has access to maybe all computers, and another one that has access to maybe just Windows workstations, as I was mentioning, if they need to do different things for those different groups of computers. So
that's a good point, because I got burned early on as a Tanium leading my customer through this, where when you create a computer group, it's immutable. You can't change it. You can change the name maybe, but what's in that group you can't change. So we had, for example, created a computer group for a certain business unit that was tied to what AD organizational unit the computers were in. Well, then there were machines that were not in that OU that still needed to be in the group, and all of a sudden our computer group we created in Tanium was broken, and it was assigned to all these RBAC things. So we had to go back and rebuild with custom tags. So I would really take that away as a best practice for folks today. Make sure you use custom tags for those dynamic computer groups, because then you're not tied to some hard set of filter criteria that's permanently defined in that computer group then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then, once I'm no longer, or when I'm done thinking about computer groups and I have those assigned to my user groups, the very next thing that I like to think about is start to think about roles. But I don't go and start creating roles right away. All of the modules have built-in roles that are very useful for you. So if you'll notice right here, I'm looking at asset, there's 3 or 4 roles. I'm just going to distill this down to something simpler like the interact roles, because everyone gets interact, and there's 4 roles that are built in. So to save yourself a lot of work, these built-in roles out of the box are there to make your life easier and save you a ton of time. I think the difficulty is sometimes, customers see all these roles, but they don't know what they do. And then they don't know where to go to find out what they do. Well, this bookmark, and we'll share this with everyone who's listening, but this has it's like a jump page to each module and the roles that are created out of the box. And I use this all the time. You're not going to memorize all the module roles, nor would you want to. But just for example, if I'm talking about, well, I have a user group and I want to give them access to interact or asset or whatever, but just for the sake of conversation, if we're looking at interact, this page will take you directly to a little table to show you what's in those roles and what access level each role provides. So rather than looking at the UI or trying to click into those roles, if you can come here and scroll through, and you can even see it's like a staircase of the different permissions for these. A lot of the modules have these spelled out very well, so that when you go back in and you're going to assign these roles to users, then okay, I want to give read-only user to this user group where they can use some saved questions. Basic user can create saved questions, and use the question bar, and power user can write actions. So that's really a valuable thing versus going and creating a new role and starting to add module permissions to it. It's fairly complicated to do that by itself, but these roles are built for you to make your life easier. So that's one thing I really want to communicate about that, to try and help people utilize what's already there that development and product management has created and done a lot of testing on.
Yeah, and that's a great frequently asked question, as we were discussing before we started recording, that, why can't I see the interact bar? I just created this new permission role. I gave them their patch operator, whatever they need. Then they open the console and there's no interact question bar. Well, yeah, you didn't allow that for them.
Yes.
So everything has to be explicitly allowed when you create that role.
Yes, and that is one of the most common questions: is how do I hide or show the question bar? How do I show or hide a module? There's a permission to ask dynamic questions, and if the user doesn't have it, they won't see the question bar. And sometimes you want to hide it from users. You don't want them to see the question bar. And same with a module. If you don't want a user to see a module, just don't give them any module role. They won't see it. So that's something to really hide things. Hiding and showing is kind of RBAC in a nutshell right there of what you want people to see. And in 2.0 in the coming release, we have something really interesting. I think that people will be I think excited about, because there's a new way to create roles that's actually much easier. We're reducing 3 types of roles into one. So we have the legacy view on the left here, where when you go up to select the new role, there would be a drop down, and I guess you could say there's 5 options, because there was deny and grant. But we had module roles, micro admin roles, and advanced roles. In the new version, there will just be a button that says new role, because you can assign all of the privileges that were given out in those 3 different types in the same role now. So this is going to save a lot of people's wrists and hands from clicking and mousing around. Even myself, just using the console on a daily basis, I'm clicking so much less. It's nice. There's easy toggle buttons in the new role UI. So, and then one point about migration of your old roles, they will just upgrade. They won't need any, it's a touch-free upgrade. They just become this new custom role. They don't no matter what their old type was. So to see what that looks like in Tanium, here's this new role button. And I want to show this so that you can get an idea of what it looks like. I just give it a name of whatever we want to call it for this. Another feature is when you're creating a new role, you can add users now while you're creating it. So you don't need to wait, and you don't need to save it first. I can go and add whoever I like to this, and then it will add them once I create it. But this UI now is more of a grid format. If I hit the plus and I want to give out some administrative privileges, there's some icons in here. So for example, every time I hover over one, it will give me an idea. This is write computer group. So you can see on the left, there's computer group. If I turn that on, I'm going to get that turned green. The circle around the checkbox indicates that it will imply another permission. So in this case, write implies read as well, and there's an icon to show the implication there. So creating roles with this model is much easier than the old way, and I can give out different permissions here, like read client status and so on, and likewise down below. If this is where I was talking about in the module roles, you don't have to go and even touch any of these if you're using the out of the box module roles, because you may not know what all of these do. So you can just hide those and not really concern yourself with them. So the new UI has some definite improvements over the old one. There's a toggle of an edit and preview on it, so it will distill down to just what you've selected, and you'll see this edit and preview mode on other pages in the new release as well. So that's kind of a quick look at the new page. I can show you.
That is super, Peter. Let's scroll down again and look at this. And I just want to make sure everybody's clear on what these new icons do when we're in edit mode. So if you click the green check mark, that's just the check mark, then that gives you just that permission. But if it's a green check mark with a circle, there are implied permissions that go with it, right?
Yes, absolutely. So any of the right ones you can see are going to imply read. So that's pretty much, if I'm giving write action group, I'm saying, well, they also get read action group. Some of the other ones, if I go down to the platform content permissions, they can be, this is like the former advanced roles. But if I'm going to give write action on something, you'll notice here that it implies a couple others, like the fact that if I'm able to deploy an action, I'm also going to be able to read my own action and read the packages, because I can't really write or create a deployment without having access to the packages. One thing that is really worth noticing, and for those who've used content sets before, this view has a new modal where you can just go select the content sets you want to give to the user. So it's going to just pop up and show it like this. And then at the bottom is a table showing everything that you have selected here. And of course, I can also go and look at it up here. But the old way was much more clicking than what I just did there. And if I wanted to add a content set, a new one, create something, I can do that here, or just add one to what I've already selected here as well.
Wow, that is fantastic, Peter, because now, granted, RBAC is complicated, but somehow our developers have managed to put all this into one interface at a glance. And I'm glad you talked about the little +1 +0 kind of box there, because that's really important. You can assign them these permissions and then they go log in and they still don't have what they need. You have to make sure that you give them the content set there they need that permission, whether it's a module content set or some custom content that you've imported, or maybe trends boards where you've put those in a custom content set. That's really important to see. Now, I have to tell you, these orange icons for the implied permissions, every time I see those, I think Star Wars Rebel Alliance.
I was thinking the same thing. That does look like the Rebel Alliance. I don't know if that was intentional, but it's definitely, there's some sort of it looks just like it to me.
So those are the implied Rebel permissions then.
Yes, that's right.
All right. So this new console, tell folks when they can expect to see this.
So this will be available in the 7.4.6 release of Titanium Server, and that we're calling it console 2.1. It may be a 2.2 in the near future, but you will see that in the 2.1 console release, which will be with the server version 7.4.6. Everybody's much more familiar with the server version of Tanium than they are the console version. So hoping to have that available soon, and so people can start taking advantage of that and save their wrist and hand a little pain.
That's fantastic. So that'll be very soon as in weeks of this recording. So if you're in TAS, you probably already have that. If you're on-prem, it'll be there very soon.
Yes.
And this is just another example of Tanium innovation where we've heard feedback from our users and we've tried to make things easier. We've really been on that spree over this last year, trying to make the console easier to use, fewer clicks, just like Peter said. Peter, anything else that you want to make sure that our audience understands before we wrap up this topic today?
Yes, I think, one of the main things I want to make users understand is that, not just that the module roles are there for you to use and they're important, but they will make your work much easier. And if you're starting out planning, even stepping outside of Tanium to think about your user groups and computer groups and those types of things, will make just spending even a couple hours planning prior to going in and clicking will really save you some headaches. There is sometimes where things have been set up kind of on the fly, whereas if you talk to your TAM or support, get an idea of how to set up your initial RBAC arrangement, you'll probably be happier with the outcome than if you just jump in and start kind of winging it.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb. If you wing it, you're not going to be happy with what you get, right?
Yeah, right.
There is a little bit of complexity here. Now, Peter shared with you a couple diagrams and some links from the docs page. Those are coming up here, and some short links for you so you can get to those. Peter, thank you for joining us on Go-Tanium Tech Talks today. And now I want to give everybody some take-home points to remember here. So RBAC best practices. So that LDAP sync feature, whenever you're setting up your implementation straight out of the gate, usually you're going to be syncing in your users, your computer groups, your users and user groups. That's really important to do that up front, right? Assess who needs what where. Don't just go in with guns a-blazing. Make sure that you figure out, map this out, take some time to think through it, interview users, and the business units that you're going to be working with. What exactly do they need? And then remember, don't make those computer groups hard and fast. And there are a few places where static sensors are going to do the job, for big bucket type things, but especially defining your business units and what computers go into those. Be sure to use custom tagging, because that's going to give you a lot of flexibility down the road. And then, as Peter said, don't go off creating your own modules, roles. Use those built-in module roles, and then whatever doesn't fit in that, go create your own custom roles for those. And finally, calling back to that old Microsoft NTFS permission model, AGLP, right? So we got accounts. These are users going into user groups that then get assigned a persona, which they have by default, and then those get the permissions, the actual roles and computer groups that are assigned, and all that comes together then to give you a secure environment. And we want that to be a good experience for you. Final takeaways for today's episode on In the Weeds with RBAC. This is a sign of a mature Tanium implementation. And there are plenty of, lab environments, places like that. Maybe it doesn't make as much sense to have a robust RBAC model, but I tell you what, your lab is a great place to start. Lab these permissions out. Make sure that you've got exactly the access you need with some demo login accounts that you create, so that you can model that out there. And then when you implement that in production, it'll go much better. Planning RBAC will really give you a better, secure experience, making sure that people only have the access that they need inside of Tanium. Also, we've got this new user easy interface coming very soon, probably be here about the time you watch this show or shortly thereafter. So look for that coming in Tanium platform release 746 with console 2.1 there. And finally, here are those bit.ly links I promised. There's the one for the RBAC overview that's just going to take you to that diagram at docs.tanium.com, my favorite website. You'll notice there's a little redesign that happened there recently, making it easier to find the docs that you need. And then also we've got the RBAC modules bit.ly link here, which is going to take you to that handy cheat sheet that Peter pointed out in the docs, where you can get to any individual module to see what exactly is in the operator role or the admin role. And finally, if you would like to discuss this topic, ask questions, you can talk to your account team, or you can interact with myself and Peter directly in the Tanium community site at community.tanium.com. Here's a short link for you to get you into that place where we can continue the Go-Tanium discussion. And finally, that's a wrap for this episode of the Go-Tanium Tech Talks, In the Weeds with RBAC. Thanks again, Peter. And until next
Absolutely.
time, Go-Tanium.